Hey everybody. These things are super short, and one of the things I was told is to keep it practical. How many people in the audience, by the way, right now are here and at this stage because they're trying to like manage teams? Okay, great. For those people and for everybody else, I hope this is super informative. What we really have, it's called like a future of work panel, but what we have on stage are people who are concerned with bringing on talent. People who are concerned with how to grow a company and have to deal with like the precarity of what happens when you're bringing a sudden influx of employees in sometimes blue ocean markets and trying to maintain what makes small business special, I imagine. Let me start out by this, and I'm going to open for like 1 or 2 questions in the last couple of minutes, so if you've got a really good one, save it. Let me open with this, and I want you guys to kick around with each other too. One of the things anybody is worried about right now, especially now that there are trends towards distance work, that we're doing all of our work over Slack, that we're bringing on people in marketplaces outside the urban centers where we understand the culture, is what do you guys do or counsel or understand as the best way to maintain, God, the stupid way to call it is like company culture, but maintain what makes you excellent when working with people who you can't see or directly interface with, or who you understand in purely sort of abstractions like text or their portfolio or whatever?
Sure, so I think the biggest thing is quality. And that really touches upon soft skills, hard skills, and the cultural fit. And so what Stephane and I were even talking about earlier is that the difficulty of finding a remote worker that's quality is not the fact that it's distance or not. It's the fact that you need to have exceptional screening processes in place and be able to read that person from a soft skills, hard skills, and cultural perspective over the internet or remotely. And so nailing that component in this day and age is really the most important part, and that will determine the success of a remote worker fundamentally.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, in general, if you're looking for great talent that wants to work for you, has your cultural values, is available right now, and is within a 25-mile radius of your office, it's a unsolvable problem, and that's why a lot of companies struggle to hire, right? And so you need to remove one of the constraints. The one that's the most logical to remove is the last one. Like you can hire people from anywhere, but with that come other challenges, and you need to learn how to hire remote people, how to keep them engaged. It can be very lonely to work from home, so a lot of people work from co-working spaces. We recently announced a deal with WeWork. Makes perfect sense. People need to be in a social environment. I think what you find, though, from a culture standpoint is there is a digital culture in the world now. I think there's more in common between an engineer in Silicon Valley and an engineer in New Orleans or in Athens, Greece, than there is between an engineer in Silicon Valley and a lawyer in Silicon Valley. And yet, we have lawyers in Silicon Valley in our company, and we get along just fine. So I think the whole idea of, well, mostly, but the whole idea of distance is, frankly, a little bit overrated. That being said, face-to-face meetings from time to time help a lot. Like, he does that a lot, we do that a lot. We have tons of people that just organize these meetups. We had one in Bali a few weeks ago. We had one in Lisbon a few months ago. So the groups of people that need to work together, they might be remote, 11 months in the year, and then 1 month in the year, they're just gonna hang out and socialize, drink together, do hackathons together, and that builds that social bond that is not always perfect when you're on video conferencing.
I think one of the major elements is really ensuring that you've got a meaningful purpose that you're working toward. And when you're doing remote work and you're not necessarily speaking or meeting with people every single day, that purpose is the thing that keeps you going. So I think part of that is ensuring that you have a good governance model around it. So you have program managers that can actually manage that process. You constantly check in with those people at the right times. We're in a business where we put 1.3 million people to work every single day. So within that business, we also have a lot of people that need to be physically on location or at a particular location. And I was thinking about this yesterday. I've had a variety of jobs in the early days. One even working in a sandwich shop where I got fired within 30 minutes, but I still count that as a job. And that's an environment, right? A sandwich shop's an environment. A warehouse is an environment. I played sports, a football, soccer team is an environment. But they all need to have a certain dynamics around having a meaningful purpose and a culture that you can transform. And the culture, I think in some senses, is that thing that's aspirational, and it's not necessarily so tangible, but it definitely exists.
So, there's a couple of, maybe buzzwords that people use that I think are really useful if people want to look them up. One is this notion of a remote-first workplace. So, the thing that doesn't work is to have a remote-tolerant workplace, meaning almost everybody is local, and sometimes we think about the remote people, and that's setting them up for being less successful because they're just not on par with the local people. If you think remote-first, meaning every conference room in your office has video conferencing. You make sure you invite the remote people to all the same meetings as the local people. You just keep them top of mind all the time. Then they're on an equal footing. And so for the same level of talent, they're just going to be as successful as the local people. The second thing that's really tied to this is switching from a world of, nobody admits that they do it, but switching from a world of managing by FaceTime to managing by results, right? And this whole concept of a results-only workplace where if people want to work 8 to 5, that's great. If they want to work, from midnight to 7 a.m., that's cool too. Really what you're managing for is the output, not the input. And that makes a huge difference when you have a, hybrid team of local and distributed people.
So one of the things that I hear is two themes that I think are in opposition to each other, which is the idea of output, which is the idea that instead of being judged, because look, as I'm the kind of worker in my company where I get a lot of shrift from like performing being busy, right? We all got that, people who like demonstrate value in different ways. Now, because of remote work, one of the things that happens is a worker is often judged by their value purely on their product, right? And now we have this sort of like very piecemeal way. And then you have something like workplace culture. One of the things that a lot of people criticize is the precarity of what people call singing for your supper. This idea that you're received as an employee as being valuable purely by what we can quantify about your product, and the better we can quantify your product, sort of the better we can run our remote workplace. But doesn't that put at risk the soft skills, the understanding of of relationships and dynamics that we don't anticipate? We fired people who product hasn't been that good, but when they left, they took everybody who loved them with them. So, I mean, how do you deal with those tensions?
I think like having a managing by objective and managing by microtask is not necessarily the same thing, right? I mean, well-run companies have been managing people by objective over the period of an annual review or quarterly review. That's the type of time frame. I think, like remote or local, it's the same thing. If you treat people like a vendor, like a supplier, like a transaction, they're gonna, not be engaged with your company. If you include people as human beings and you hire them because they love your culture, they love your mission, and you treat them like they're part of the company, then they give the best of themselves. And I think, if anything, the more people are remote, the more there's value in those soft skills, in giving that extra love, because day in, day out, they're in front of their laptops, and it can feel a little bit lonely.
You look super skeptical and alien.
Well, I think that's true for the most part, but look, if DJ Tiesto doesn't put out a hit or Messi doesn't score a goal, they're going to get canned. That's just a fact. And in an office environment, we often too much value, oh, this person's a really nice person, all that sort of stuff. This actually brings out, in a much more objective way, the value that they're contributing to the company. And you have to understand that in any company, whether it's Upwork or Adecco or our company or any company that's in the audience, you have competitors that are competing to beat you every single day. And do you want to have the people who have the best smile or are producing the better results? And that's the fundamental question, I think. Everyone wants the person who's producing the better results, and the remote constraint really sets forth a framework that allows that to shine through.
I think you have to be adding value, right? So if you're adding value as an employee and those are your outputs as a developer and that's the results that you're producing, that's one thing. You're adding value from a sales perspective, it's quantifiable. But there also are some roles which are quite challenging to quantify or qualify that value. And I think with some of the online tools that these guys also have, it becomes easier to pick those out of your business. And I think we'll start to move more towards outcome-based, not for all positions, but if we don't as human beings, there are some interesting technologies that will say, hey, I'm a robot, I can clean this particular hotel, this particular area in a shorter space of time than you can. So what's the value of you doing it versus me, right? So I think you have to be constantly ensuring that you're delivering value as an employee, whatever field you're in.
And I think to me it's more like reflecting on the manager than it's reflecting on the employee. I think the main point I was trying to make here is when we talk to managers, particularly people that haven't done this before, about building a remote or a hybrid workforce, a lot of what you hear is, how do I know that they're working? And that's a reflection on you as a manager, not on the people that are working remotely. Sure. It's like, well, if you don't know that people are working based on judging the output of the working on, then maybe you need to learn how to be a manager, because if all you do is counting the number of hours that they spend in the office, you're probably not doing your job, right? So that is more the change that needs to happen. Nobody will admit that they manage by FaceTime, but a lot of people do.
Well, I love it. So let me, two things. One is I just want to push one more time on what you guys are talking about, which is because perceiving results differently, that's good. That's good to not have that mindset of, I want to see somebody be busy. I'm going to look more at KPIs. I'm going to look more at output. What about precarity? Because the very real thing felt by workers is when you experience a super objectives and results driven place, especially as a distance worker, a lot of times what I hear in that job description is I'm going to be doing like 30 hours a week contract stuff, never going to have insurance. Like it creates a workplace environment of constant threat, and we are seeing some of that darkness rear its head.
So that's actually an area that we're thinking about a lot and we're addressing. Meaning it shouldn't matter on your mode of employment, right? Whether we do temporary work, permanent work, freelance work, contract work, everybody should still have the same right to the same types of benefits, right? So it shouldn't be riskier because you're a freelancer. And I think you'll start to see the rise of a more holistic approach to how you manage people and the benefits that you give them across the world of work. And within the Adecco group, we're constantly thinking and looking at that and how we can make sure that person feels valued, but you're still results-based to an extent, right? We'll give you the benefits and so on, but you still have to produce the goods.
And then the last thing I want to ask you, just for the last couple of minutes before we see if you had a question out there. When you guys talk about a lot of what I hear is skills of the manager having to do a lot of the work here, right? So we've lost being able to see our employees. We've lost being able to the whole range of things we lose when we're working at distance and we're working based on objectives and key results. What then do managers? What are the skills that management has to develop in order to bridge that gap?
Sure. So I think what Stephane was saying before was correct, that you don't manage on the micro level, you manage sort of in the middle or on a higher level. Did you hit that goal? Did you hit that objective, whatever that might be? And getting the team on this page is really important. Ben Horowitz calls it communication architecture. How you really communicate to your team your goals, your ideas, disseminate them throughout the organization, and then have them high level enough so that people can follow their own judgment and instinct to hit those. Now, of course, as a manager, you're always going to work to get your team to get to those results better or faster, or all the above, but you don't want to be managing on the micro level. You want to be getting people on board who know how to hit goals, who know how to go towards a direction, and setting that framework is really critical for success for a remote team or even a in-house team. And the really interesting thing is that remote is being used often as a scapegoat, right? Oh, we failed because we're remote. We failed because they were distributed. No, it's because you're a bad manager, and that's usually the case. That person would have succeeded if they were remote or in-house. It doesn't really matter. What we find is that the results are pretty similar if you have a great management team in place and a great remote team.
Yeah, and I would add, the situation is getting easier because pretty much every business school in the country now teaches a class on managing virtual teams. So I think it's more an issue for people in my generation where at the time you were taught to be a traditional manager, command and control, tell people what to do, and then they work for you so they do it. In today's world where some of your remote team members are freelancers, they don't work for you. They work for you as a client, not as an employee, and they're not physically present. So if you've taken those classes where you learn how to manage virtual teams, you do well. If you haven't, there's plenty of literature online where you can learn how to do this well. It's not brain surgery at the end of the day. It's a lot of common sense, but it does take a little bit of effort at the beginning, like anything new that you learn.
I think also kind of flipping it on the other side is that team dynamics is really important, especially in sales. So I think it depends on the type of work again, because if you have a sales team and you're constantly working remote, it can get frustrating, it can get challenging. You sometimes need your buddy around you to pick you back up and G you up. And generally speaking, teams with, again, the best cultures seem to be successful and seem to be the ones that win. And I believe that in sales environments, you need to continue to foster that culture. And I think it's really important that we look at the types of jobs that we're discussing when we discuss remote work for now. That will change and develop, but for now, that's something that's an area we need to take note on.
Is there anybody out there? Any raised hands? Oh, we've got a couple. Is there a guy with a mic? No, there's not. Just shout it. Yes. Repeat it. Great. Did you guys hear it? The question is
the question is schedules and time zones.
Yeah, schedules and being frustrated with not being working contemporaneously with each other.
So I can tell you the way we do it. So we're about 1,000 people in the company, but it's 300 employees, 700 freelancers, 100 different countries. So we definitely run into that a lot. I think the main thing is to have overlap in time zones between people that need to work together. So we typically try to have about 4 hours of overlap between team members. There's actually value in people not overlapping too much because quite often, particularly for things like engineering where it takes a lot of cognitive load to get back in the zone, get back in the flow, like knowing that you don't have a PM and a designer and a bunch of sales rep interrupting you every 5 minutes is nice, but you do need to still be able to interact. And so we try to align teams in a way that there's at least 4 hours every day where they can overlap. And usually it's early in the morning, late in the evening. And so they have 2 slots in the day where they can talk to each other. And it's that, and then adopting tools and a culture where asynchronous work is okay. It means like you don't expect people to pick up the phone or answer your chat immediately. You use tools more like Jira or more like Slack where people might get back to you in 6 hours because that's when they wake up.
Anybody else have an answer for that question?
Yeah, ours is very similar. We try to divvy it up by function. So our engineering is in a specific time zone, and it could be a range of time zones. It doesn't have to be one specific time zone, but having a general idea of what that time zone is, if it's Eastern Europe or Western Europe or the Americas, great, stick to that. But you want to divvy up your functions by time zone for the most part. Now, you could have specific engineering teams that are working on things that might correlate to an operations team in the Americas, and you want them central to that. But generally speaking, you do want to function or divvy up by function and time zone.
Awesome. And that we're like running over. So thank you guys so much for being here with us. We'll all be floating around afterwards. Enjoy what's left of the rest of the event. And thank you guys so much.